Lagiacrus, my favorite monster in Monster Hunter, the dreaded Lord of the Seas, and the sole reason why everyone's begging for underwater combat to return. Lagiacrus is, of course, a Leviathan, and Leviathans are one of my favorite monster types. For this video, I'll be doing something special. Alongside Lagiacrus, I'll also be showcasing other Monster Hunter Tri-Leviathans, like Ludroth and Royal Ludroth, or the fan favorite Gobul, as well as Agnaktor, and, oh, he's big, Agnaktor. He barely even fits. But of course, Lagiacrus is the focus of this video, so I'm going to be mostly talking about him. As always, the instructions and parts list for all my models and their subspecies are available under the second tier membership on my Patreon. That's right, Purple Ludroth, Glacial Agnaktor, Ivory Lagiacrus, and Abyssal Lagiacrus are also all available as instructions. All of my instructions come with a file that automatically builds a shopping cart of the pieces that you'll need to build this monster along with all my other monsters through the #1 LEGO resale website, bricklink.com. There will always be some slight differences between the physical model here and the digital model that's in the instructions. But always, the instructions version is the best possible version of my model. Lagiacrus is very large, and it's difficult to put him into a good pose for the camera. This Lagiacrus takes influence from the Monster Hunter Diary and Monster Hunter Stories versions of the model for the larger head and the simplified color blocking. However, it does not actually use the color palette of Stories or the Diary version. Lagiacrus's color in the Monster Hunter titles is a muted blue, so I was left with the difficult choice of deciding which blue am I going to make Lagiacrus. And I ultimately decided on using LEGO's regular blue color, as you see here, because it has the most options for part variety. That there's lots of parts in the regular blue color, so I was able to pull off better shaping on the head and everything overall. Unfortunately, honestly, none of LEGO's blues actually are an exact match to Lagiacrus's color. I mean, eventually, when LEGO finally adds Wedge 2x1x1/2 right in dark azure color, I'll add an instructions option for the Stories color palette, which is arguably the closest color option for the main series Lagiacrus model as well. Now let's do a quick size comparison like I always do. Very briefly, here is a LEGO minifigure, and this is about how big a hunter is in Monster Hunter. For another comparison, here is a random Bionicle for other action figures. For the sake of nostalgia, here is a Rathalos to mimic the opening of Monster Hunter 3, and just to make it complete, here's an Aptonoth as well, which, of course, by the way, Rathalos and Aptonoth also have instructions on my Patreon. But compared to a Rathalos, he's about right. I think that's about correct compared to a Rathalos on sizing. Again, the head is a little bit big, but I always make the heads a little bit big for that cute look. Lagiacrus is the longest in length and also the largest overall of the builds I've showcased in these videos so far. Obviously, I have bigger builds. My Latreon and Gravios are both bigger. This helps illustrate a point that my models have, where the bigger they get, the more difficult it is for you to be able to play with them. I've given this Lagiacrus many points of articulation, as you could see throughout the video. I've been able to move his body around, move his head around, his tail can move, all of his legs can move. But unfortunately, with heavy weight combined with joints, you find that usually doesn't hold its shape very well. I can very easily knock his head over, which ruins the whole pose. And that's just because his head and neck is just so heavy and there's no actual muscle to hold it all together, and LEGO's joints aren't very sturdy to begin with, so we're kind of stuck with this this is just it has to do sort of mentality. Because obviously we all want the pose. We all want to be able to pose him any way we want, but it comes at the cost of being difficult to play with him. Thankfully, the model isn't very fragile. It's not going to break on you. I think the head is maybe the most fragile part. If I try to play with it, yeah, he just sort of just knocks, he just falls over, which is unfortunate, because I think a kid would really love to play with a model like this. It's not really meant for play. If I pick him up, he will just fall over So bottom line, this model is definitely more for display rather than play. I hope LEGO eventually creates stronger joints for models like this so that you guys are actually able to play with these models, or have kids that are able to play with these models, because I feel like it'd be really fun. I am very satisfied with how I did the tail end, though. I used a old retired piece, those black pieces there, in order to allow for that shaping. Overall, I feel I did a good job on the shaping of the head and the tail, since those are the flashiest points of the model, and they gotta be the parts that look good. And now for my thoughts on Lagiacrus as a monster. Lagiacrus, again, is my favorite monster. However, it's my favorite monster for a complex assortment of aesthetics and moments I experienced in Monster Hunter Tri, and these are moments that cannot be replicated in a game like Monster Hunter Generations. Do I think Lagiacrus is a good fight? I don't know. Probably not. Definitely not in Generations. I feel like he's just like a big blue Kezu in Generations. I like Lagiacrus aesthetically and thematically. Lagiacrus is the Lord of the Seas. He is a villain. He's truly the villain of the ocean. And when I was a kid, it was very dramatic and fun when my hunter was under-leveled and I had to run from the Lagiacrus. No monster has ever frightened and excited me like Lagiacrus did. Lagiacrus set the stage of what I thought Monster Hunter was going to be, thematically and aesthetically, and obviously that's not what Monster Hunter is. I thought that Monster Hunter was going to be about this challenge where you have to build yourself up and you have to get the courage to face these giant challenges. These very, very large monsters that are huge. These days, that experience, I feel, is gone. Many of the monsters are made now to be smaller, to be more compact. They're not meant to be large animals. They're more meant to be... They use their arms more. Like, they're more fantastical. They're cool and flashy, but they're not really scary or intimidating anymore. There's no sinking feeling in my gut. There's no worry that the big dragon is going to make my hunter faint just because they're so big and powerful. And I know a huge part of that is in the older games, the monsters would use a lot more cheap tactics and a lot more hitboxes that were larger in order to create that feeling of you're powerless. But I do think that there is value in that. The power dynamic of the weak hunter conquering the terrifying and impossible challenge. I feel like that's gone, and now Monster Hunter is more of a dance. It's like a dance between the trained warrior and the flashy boss. Lagiacrus just doesn't keep up in a game like Rise or Generations, and it needs to be in a game that focuses more on survival, more on ecology, more on a game that's about fighting against tooth and nail, where you have limited options and you have to really struggle just to land a single hit. And not how well you time your counters or manage your wire bugs. Lagiacrus is a game for where there is no counters. Lagiacrus overall is just perfect as an underwater predator. He's just really well designed. He's got a really nice design. It's a testament of Capcom's design team. Alright, now I gotta really quickly cover the other Leviathans. Agnaktor and Ludroth are just simple little builds. They're cute, they're fun to play with, they won't break, and they're cheap to get. So if you just want like a cute little model to have your little hunter fight, these are highly recommended. Royal Ludroth is also quite cheap to make. He's got a lot of posability. He will not break. He's rather cute. I like the way that his head swivels. But this one's really fun. I think that if you're a big fan of Royal Ludroth, I highly suggest you make this model. I think it'd be perfect for your LEGO display. Similarly with Gobul, he's just a cute purple monster. He's very flat, so he doesn't really display well on this camera setup I have right now. But he is also fun to play with. He will absolutely knock out your hunter. He's got the lantern. His mouth opens and closes. He's got his little feet, his tail. He doesn't inflate. He doesn't grow the spikes, and that's just because LEGO doesn't really allow it. I'm sure that you could maybe customize it so he has spikes, but overall, he's just a really cute model. Cheap to get, cheap to make, and I think he's actually one of the cheapest models that I have for large monsters. And finally, Agnaktor, the big boy here. He is actually the most expensive model and the most pieces in a model that I've released so far on my Patreon. He's a lot like Lagiacrus. He's heavy, he's long, he can pose, kinda, but he doesn't really hold his shape as much. His neck can move. It can kind of move forward and back, but in order to get the shaping of the frill of his back, he doesn't have a lot of posability. He's definitely meant more for display rather than for play. But while I have him here, I might as well grab Brachydios just so you guys can see him next to each other. Just because I know this is a fan favorite fight between Brachydios and Agnaktor. That's what they look like next to each other. Yeah, so I'm sure Brachydios could knock him out. And that's everything, folks. All the models you saw today are all available on my Patreon with their subspecies. Thanks for watching. I really appreciate everyone. Special thanks to my patrons. Thank you so much for all your support. I really appreciate it, and it helps me make more models for all of you, and it helps me make more videos for all of you. I actually have an announcement regarding my Patreon. I will be increasing the cost of the second tier membership by $1 in the new year, because the work required to make these models and instructions ended up being more than I anticipated. It's no longer a hobby, and now it's a job, and I take extra care to make sure that all these models are perfect for you all. Many of the models I actually completely rework. I re-engineer and redesign many of the models before I turn them into instructions, which is why if you look at my galleries or my older photos of these monsters, they look totally different than the instructions versions. I want to make sure that they all live up to the same standard, and a standard that you all can appreciate. I really hope you all continue to support me despite the $1 increase, and I'll continue to release instructions for the rest of the Monster Hunter roster. Here's to making every single monster in Monster Hunter out of Lego, except Magnamallow, because I don't like Magnamallow. Oh, with that said, what's next? Let me go grab the next monster. That's right, Nargacuga! Nargacuga will be next, and I know you guys are going to love this one. I'm really excited to do the subspecies like Lucent and Green Nargacuga. Thank you all for supporting me, and see you next time. Nargacuga, let's go!